The other day, Ann and I were getting ready to go to our respective offices. She was getting ready to actually leave our house and go to the medical clinic. I was getting ready to leave the bedroom and go to the kitchen where I have my makeshift office. And before we walked out, she said, "It's Wednesday." And indeed it was, and that was some very, very helpful information for me in this period when I'm working from home because I'm not interacting with staff as often as usual. And we don't have as many committee meetings, and there aren't Sunday school classes and midweek classes and this group and that group meeting. One day seems an awful lot like the next one, and I can get kind of lost as to which day it was. So when she said it's Wednesday, I really, really appreciated the information. Next Sunday is Pentecost Sunday, and if this were any other year, I would be saying to you, wear red to worship when you come next week. Stay after worship for a barbecue that will be prepared for you by members of the church, and also plan to make a donation to the Pentecost offering. But of course, this year is not like any other year, and so all of that's kind of up for grabs, right? You're not going to come here for worship, so the color that you wear to worship is up to you. You can wear any color you want to worship. There will not be a barbecue lunch here after worship. If you would like to have a barbecue lunch, I suggest you either make it yourself or order out. And as far as giving to the Pentecost offering, I hope you will still do that, but you need to either mail a check to the church or go to our website or text to give to make that happen. It is a most unusual year, and it'll be an unusual Pentecost as it was an unusual Easter and an unusual Youth Sunday last week. Well, Thursday of this last week was also one of the festive occasions in the worshiping life of the church, the Feast of the Ascension. The story about Jesus does not end with his resurrection, and he continues to appear to the disciples to encourage them in their ministry, to give them instruction until comes that time, 40 days after Easter, the day of Ascension, when Jesus is lifted up on a cloud out of their sight to go to heaven and never for the disciples to see him again. It's the story that I was read here for us just a few minutes ago. But before he goes, the disciples ask him this question: "Lord, is now the time that you will restore the kingdom of Israel?" Now, before we jump on to Jesus' answer, I want to take this apart a little bit because I noticed something about this passage this year that frankly I have never noticed before. When the disciples ask about the kingdom of Israel, the kingdom of Israel really hasn't existed for at least 700 years. And 700 years ago, it was a puppet to other stronger kingdoms around it. No, the real glory days of the kingdom of Israel, over 1,000 years ago, during the reigns of King Saul, King David, and King Solomon. So the disciples are remembering an earlier time when things were better and perhaps even perfect. So now let's go on to what Jesus says to them. He redirects them with his answer. He says to them, "It's not for you to know the times that the Father has set, but you will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes upon you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and Judea and Samaria and to the ends of the earth." Now, you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem. Jerusalem was an important city at that point in time, and it had been the capital city of the nation of Israel back 1,000 years ago. It's where they're at right now. But he says, "And you will be my witnesses in Judea." Well, Judea is the larger area in which the city of Jerusalem resides. It's an area that is Jewish, just the regular folk. And then comes the first little hitch in Jesus' answer. "And you will be my witnesses in Samaria." Now, you know the story of the Good Samaritan, and part of the irony of the story of the Good Samaritan is that most Jews in Judea didn't think there were any good Samaritans. The hatred between the Samaritans and the people of Judea was long-standing. And Jesus is saying, you're going to be my witnesses in Samaria, and you're going to be my witnesses to the ends of the earth. And indeed, the book of the Acts of the Apostles is going to lay out exactly that way. The disciples will be witnesses in Jerusalem, and then the expanding circles to Judea, and then Samaria, and then to the ends of the earth, even into Asia, into Africa, and into Europe. It's a wonderful story. But here's the thing. Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, the ends of the earth, those were, in Jesus' day, all modern names for modern times. It was as though Jesus was saying, guys, you're thinking about the past. We're not going that way. We're going towards the future. So it's a sunny Saturday, as I recall, and I am on the golf course with my buddies, and I have played the first hole and made a complete and total mess out of it. Such a bad mess that at this point in time, the thought goes through my brain that if I were to walk backwards up the first fairway to the clubhouse, out to the parking lot, throw my clubs in the trunk, drive home, I could be on my back patio having an iced tea in about 15 minutes. But if I stay out here on the golf course, I could have like 3 more hours of absolute misery. Now, that particular Saturday, Mark Scott was in the golf group. And those of you who are watching remotely and have absolutely no idea who Mark Scott is, Mark's a member of our church, and Mark is a fantastic storyteller. And part of what makes Mark such a good storyteller is he never tells you why he's telling you the story. He never starts the story by saying, hey, I heard this funny story. Let me tell you this funny story. He just tells you the story, and it's till the end that you figure out it's a funny story, or it's a poignant story, or it's a story about some politician in Corpus Christi or something like that. So he just starts telling me this story. He says, one of my favorite movies is Cannonball Run. And he tells about a scene where they're getting ready to start a race. And these are sports cars, 2-seater sports car, and there's a guy in the passenger seat, and the Italian driver jumps into the driver's seat. And he said, let me tell you how Italians drive. And he reaches up and he grabs hold of the rearview mirror and he rips it off and he throws it in the back seat. And he says, what is behind me does not matter. Well, I got the point. Alan, you can't play the first hole over again. It's over. It's done. Forget about it. Now you got to go play the second hole. Yeah, the disciples want to look backwards 1,000 years back to the old days when Israel was really something, but Jesus reaches up there and he rips that rearview mirror off the windshield and he throws it in the back seat and he says, guys, we're not going that way. We're going this way. We're going forward. You're going to take the gospel around the world. Don't worry about old Israel. That's dust. We're doing a new thing. So one of the questions I am asked is, when do you think we will get back to normal? And, one of the questions I want to ask right as immediately in return was, well, when do you remember normal? I'm not sure I know what normal is. There was the normal that was worship in our sanctuary before we started doing the social distancing and online worship because of coronavirus. But there was a time before that was the normal of the 1950s and 60s when mainline churches like the Presbyterian Church were the example and standard of Christianity in the United States. There is the normal that was back in the colonial days when churches came from Europe and had to establish a denominational identity rather than a national identity because they were in this new land, and they couldn't count upon a government to establish the religion, so they developed denominations. That was a normal then. And I can take you back through church history to all kinds of watershed marks and say, well, what normal is it that we're going for? We don't know. I don't know for sure. The session will have a conversation about it, but there's one thing I'm pretty sure of. It's perhaps not best to be looking backwards, but to be looking forwards. So as I look forwards, here are some things that I'm pretty sure of as we do think about being able to worship together again in the sanctuary. The first one is maybe the only one you hear because it may be upsetting enough that you won't want to listen any longer. You may not be able to sit in the same seat you have sat in for the last however many years. If we're going to keep to the social distancing guidelines, we're going to have to close some pews off, and we're going to have to establish where some people sit and where people don't sit. And that may mean that your favorite seat is in the don't sit area, and I'm sorry about that. One of the things we won't be able to do is sing hymns as a congregation for a while. Iris Fielden has been given a new role in the life of the church. I have asked her to serve as our cantor, as in the Jewish synagogue where someone sings the prayers on behalf of the congregation. Iris will be singing the hymns on behalf of all the rest of us. We'll have to find a different way to pass the peace that does not involve handshakes and hugs and so forth. And we'll have to find a different way to share the offering. You won't be able to drop it into a plate as it's passed along the pew. It'll probably be a basket sitting by the door where we'll ask you to leave the donations that you have to make. One of the ones that's got me most troubled right now is trying to figure out how to get people in and out of the sanctuary. The design of the entry into that sanctuary, and we have only one principal entry point into that sanctuary, is narrow, and it was meant to be. It was designed that way to be a reminder of the eye of the needle that Jesus says you have to go through to be one of his followers. Theologically, it's very, very significant. Realistically, it's really, really inconvenient when you're supposed to social distance from one another. We may be in a situation where we will have to have ushers to let you into the sanctuary and wait until you have walked through the eye of the needle before letting the next people in. That, and there are a lot of other considerations about trying to get things back up and running, but we're going that way. We're going that way. Jesus in his ascension did not say to the disciples, you will be my witnesses in the sanctuary at 3707 Santa Fe, Corpus Christi, Texas. Of course he didn't. He did say, you will be my witnesses to the ends of the earth. The sanctuary is simply a place that we come to together so that we can see each other, so that we can be renewed in our faith and strengthened for the witness that we make out in the world. But that's the key thing, our witness out in the world. The sanctuary is a place for refueling and renewal, but we're going that way. We're going forward. There's still a world that is in need of healing, kindness, mercy, compassion, and love. That's the way forward for the church, and it always has been. That rearview mirror, frankly, we don't need it. We're not going that way.